Hey everyone, welcome to the editor Q&A. My name is Randy Searles. I'm a former military, 20 plus years, Green Beret and Ranger, and now I'm an editor, developmental editor, a book coach, and a ghostwriter. And the purpose of this is it's exactly what the name is, editor Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to write them in, and I'll answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to talk about the topic of the day. Unfortunately, my buddy Dan couldn't be here. We usually kind of do this as a two-man show, but he'll be here next week. But today I wanted to talk about scene writing, okay, and how to write a compelling scene. So I use people who've listened to me before. I use the StoryGrid method. StoryGrid method is an editing method developed by Sean Coyne that talks about the global story, and he uses a technique called the foolscap, where you can basically read a first draft or whatever draft you want of a manuscript. We're talking about fiction here, and analyze it in one page of notes and see if the story works. And Sean Coyne developed this over 30 years, working for various publishing companies, working with a number of best-selling authors, including Stephen Pressfield. And it works. You can plot this whole thing out in one page, a foolscap page. It's a long yellow legal pad, and kind of see if the story is going to work or not, and what's missing. All right. Once you do that, though, you're going to have to write it, or you're going to have to may have to rewrite parts of it, and you're going to have to write chapters and scenes. And if you don't do that in a compelling way, the readers aren't going to finish your book. You may have a great story, but if they're not getting hooked from scene to scene to scene, then they're going to put the book down, and they're either not going to rate it or they're not going to rate it well. So today I want to talk about the StoryGrid method, and I encourage you to go to the YouTube page for StoryGrid and watch the great content they have there. Just to be transparent, I work for StoryGrid as a contractor, and I'm a mentor in their mentoring program, which is great. And they just we just had a couple of people that we mentored publish books last week, and the one specifically I'm talking about is called The Trauma Machine, and it's a great course. Not just because I train there, but because I think it's really making people better writers, which is the whole goal for this behind the StoryGrid. So let's talk about scenes. How do you write a great, compelling scene? Well, each scene ideally should have an antagonist and a protagonist, because that is the best way to build tension. Now, obviously, there's books that just have like the main character, the protagonist, doing something and thinking in his head what he's got to do and the options he has and all the considerations that he's have built up over the book or something like that. But most scenes have other characters in it. And if you have other characters, then there should be some kind of conflict between those characters, between the protagonist of the scene and the antagonist of the scene. Now, this doesn't necessarily reflect the antagonist and the protagonist of the book. Okay, you're going to have a villain and a hero, and maybe both of those individuals are not in the same scene. They will be, obviously, eventually, but they're not going to be necessarily in every scene. That means you have to have a different antagonist or a different protagonist for the scenes. Now, the antagonist and protagonist doesn't mean good guy and bad guy in the scene. It means the protagonist is reacting to the antagonist. The antagonist creates an inciting incident, okay, that knocks the protagonist out of their ordinary world. So at the beginning of the scene, the protagonist is going about their normal day, for instance. And if you let's look, if for those of us who have seen Matrix, we have Neo going to work after he goes out with the gang that he sold some some digital content to. And then he saw the White Rabbit, and he went out to the club and he met Trinity. And then he goes to work. He wakes up and he gets up and he goes to work, and he's late for work and he gets reprimanded by the boss. And then he goes to his cubicle. That's kind of where the scene starts, right? So he's in his cubicle and he thinks he's about to go through his normal day making software or whatever he does. And suddenly someone gives a special delivery, which probably isn't odd for a day. I mean, he works there. He didn't seem to react too differently. It's like special delivery. He's like, oh, okay. He signs it. He opens it up. The phone pops out. Still not too weird. I mean, he's just like, what's this all about? But it doesn't make him change what he's going to do. He still thinks he's going to work a normal day. And then Morpheus calls and he answers it. And Morpheus points out that there's authorities looking for him. That's the inciting incident. At that moment, Neo knows he has to change whatever he was planning on doing that day because he's about to be arrested. So he's got to figure out how he's going to react to this inciting incident. Okay. And so that's the inciting incident of that scene, because that is what's out of the ordinary. Even when he woke up late and had to go see the boss, he kind of knew he was going to have to see the boss because he's going to be late. So that's just his ordinary day. But the inciting incident that changed his day, that made him like not go think about work, was when he realized that the authorities were coming to get him. Okay. Then there's a bunch of what we call progressive complications. And I'm going to get into that. That's kind of another video that we're going to do. Okay. But eventually there's going to be a lot of dialogue, action leading up to Neo having to make a really difficult decision. Okay. In this case, he follows Morpheus's orders, trying to avoid the authorities all the way so basically he wants to escape without endangering his life. All right. That's his goal. And Morpheus wants him to escape and endanger his life in order to escape, because he's going to ask him to do some dangerous stuff. Okay. And so he walks Neo to get all the way out and gets him out the window and says, hey, you're going to have to jump for that thing. Neo drops the phone and he goes all the way out on the ledge. He's still trying to escape, and he's hoping he's not endangering his life, but he refuses to jump. Okay, that's the difficult decision. All right, so that's what we call the crisis point, where there's an ultimatum. Like Morpheus is like, either jump or you're going to get caught. Okay, and so if you jump, you'll be free, and you won't get arrested, and you won't get fined, and you won't get whatever, and whatever they're going to find, because you're doing a lot of legal stuff, or you can escape, or you can go back, you can get arrested. Those are your two choices. And so he decides it's too dangerous. And his decision, that hard decision, based on those stakes, do I face the authorities and live, or do I take this risk and possibly die? Do I get arrested and fined and whatever else that they can do to me, but I live, or do I get free and to do another thing another day? And he chooses to go back and get arrested. So that is his climactic decision. Okay. So we have the inciting incident that disrupts a ball of chaos, that disrupts the protagonist's day. Then you have the turning point, which is his last attempt to get what he wants without sacrificing, in this case, his life. Okay. Without making a sacrifice, where he goes up on the ledge and he drops the phone. He's like, this is it. I'm not doing this. And he turns around. So that's the turning point, is his last attempt to get what he wants without making that sacrifice. The crisis point is the ultimatum, like jump and be free, go back and get arrested. And that opens up these two viable options that he has agency to make this decision with really high stakes, equal stakes, okay, for him. And he decides to turn around and go back. That's his decision. That's the climax, his climactic decision. And then there's a resolution. The resolution is he gets arrested. The authorities arrest him. And that's the end of the scene. But all that stuff builds tension. The conflict of Morpheus pushing Neo closer and closer to risking his life to escape. And we are watching this and we are getting anxious because we're anxious for Neo. We're concerned about Neo. All right. And because we're getting closer and closer to this moment where he's going to have to make that jump and risk it all or give up and turn himself in. We want to know what he's going to do. Now, this is important because this is all about character development and character arc. At the beginning of the movie, Neo's not a hero. Obviously, he doesn't make that jump. He doesn't have confidence in his abilities, and he doesn't want to risk his life. That's completely different than the Neo at the end, who's willing to do all that stuff, who's walking into the FBI building, for lack of a better word, the agents building with guns and just blowing everything up. Okay, knowing that he could die, but willing to risk it all for Morpheus. Okay, so we see by the decisions that the protagonist makes in each scene, we see what the character values at that point in the story. What's important to that character? What are his morals? What are his values? Okay, by the decisions that he makes, the positions that the author puts the character in, and the difficult decisions that he has to make, we see what kind of person he is. What is his personality? What is his actual character? Okay. And then as the story develops, we see the decisions he makes in different situations, and we see his character change. We see him become the hero that he becomes at the end of the story. We see him change into that person by the decisions that he makes. Red pill, blue pill. You know, I'm gonna, I got an idea. We're gonna go break Morpheus out. I'm going back in. Am I gonna run away from this final combat with the agent? Or do I have confidence that I'm the one and do I take him on? This is the character arc that you're developing as the author. And every single scene has to be a piece of that character for your protagonist and showing the reader how he changes and what changes him. All right. Hopefully that's helpful. We call them the 5 commandments: the inciting incident, the turning point, the crisis, the climax, and the resolution. And they're all of them are affected by the goals of the antagonist and protagonist of the scene. So if you're not familiar with the Story Grid, you can pick up the book at Amazon if you want. You can watch all this YouTube content for free at the Story Grid channel there. And I've been using it. I use it for my thesis in my master's for creative writing. And I use it for the second half of my thesis because I didn't know about it for the first half. I spent a year writing this book. And then I read the Story Grid and I wrote the last half of my book in like 2 or 3 weeks. When I turned it into my thesis cadre, when they read it, they said, the second part of the book was a lot more interesting. And I was like, wow, that's interesting that you should say that, because that's when I use the Story Grid. And I use the Story Grid in so many parts of my business, my editing business, and helping my friends write. I've helped them write op-eds for different articles and for newspapers. I've helped them write speeches for congressional hearings. And I use the 5 commandments to kind of organize their thoughts. And so it's a super useful technique. So that's all I got for today. I'll be back with Monday, and I'll be back with Dan on Monday, and we'll talk about some more writing, publishing, and editing. If there's anyone, I'll give you about 1 minute. If there's anyone out there who wants to ask any questions, I'm available. But if not, then I'm going to sign out. All right. Have a great day.